spoilers ahead.
Project Wolf Hunting's a South Korean sci-fi action horror movie directed by Kim Hun-sun, starring Seo In-guk and Jang Don-yoon. It premiered at the 2022 Toronto Film Festival and was released in Korean theaters in September 2022.
I had no idea what to expect coming into this movie. I'm very familiar with Korean cinema, as you should be. I could focus an entire series of videos just on scary Korean movies. Maybe I will. But I do understand for some people these subtitles can interfere with the passive watching experience, and voiceovers rarely do a movie justice, so for those of you who don't do foreign horror movies, allow me to be your humble narrator, absolutely free of charge. The movie presents itself as a sci-fi, and that's why I'm presenting it to you from here in my totally real space station. But as you're about to see, it's a straight-up gore fest. Let's check out the plot.
The plot.
As advertised, the movie opens with the police loading a collection of ragtag criminals onto a cargo ship. They all seem pretty badass. But this one's extra badass because he's pulled the sleeves off his prison onesie. And everyone knows the only thing tougher than having tattoos is making sure other people see your tattoos. But the cops are badass too because it's important in movies to have equally matched opposition. And once they're all on board, the police read us their rap sheets so we know just how badass they actually are. The officer in charge tells everyone there are no cameras on board as a warning against acting like the criminals they are. With the stage set for conflict, the ship sets sail under a very foreshadowing blood-red sky. While the cops are feeding the convicts, the ship's doctor slips downstairs where things are seriously shifty, and he runs his eyes over a restrained prisoner who's not looking so great. His eyes are stapled shut and his mouth's full of maggots, so he injects him with some unnamed substance and throws him a few Tic Tacs for good measure. Meanwhile, back upstairs, Sleeveless in Seattle produces a tiny wire configuration to get everyone out of their handcuffs. And as soon as everyone's freed from their shackles, the bloody fun begins. And there's more blood in the first fight scene than there was in the entire elevator of the hotel. They move into the ship's control room and dismantle the communications equipment and the radar. So back on land, it appears as though the ship's disappeared. So everyone back on land swears at each other and starts trying harder to locate the vessel. And if I ended up in that room back on land somehow while everything was tense, I'd be all like,
팀장님, 신호가 끊겼습니다.
무슨 말이야 그게?
입맛에서도 사라졌습니다.
뭐라는 거야 이 새끼들이? AIS 고장 아니야?
For the third time, I don't speak Korean. I took Taekwondo as a kid. I could probably still count to 10, but I don't think that's really gonna help right now.
보안 경보 시스템은?
I was trying to board my cruise ship and I got shuffled down the wrong gangway, and here I am. And it's really cool that you guys have subtitles, but what good are they really if you can't understand what I'm saying?
IMO 연락해서 위성 리셋이라도 하라고 하란 말이야. 알았어들? 예, 알겠습니다.
하나, 둘, 셋, 넷, 다섯, 여섯, 일곱, 여덟, 아홉, 열, 열여, 그녀.
Back on the ship, ears are bitten off and handcuffs are pounded into skulls. There's stabbings and broken bones and slow excruciating close-ups and blood and blood and blood and, oh, some urine too. On the other side of the ship, the good guys, in this movie anyway, are starting to realize something's not right. And while they're doing their realizing, the bad guys are getting organized and establishing ranks. Not surprisingly, Sleeveless in Seattle's elected himself the leader, and his first order of business is to throw on the cringiest shirt any Eastern sweatshops ever produced. The ship's doctor goes into a panic with all the gunfire and blood and locks himself in his room with his nurse. Right when he's doing that, the prisoner from the lower decks springs back to life. Inevitably, the good guys come face to face with the bad guys down in the engine room. There's another big fight scene, and this time there's sledgehammers and hatchets, and right as the fight's kicking off, the thing from downstairs arrives. And he's like they mixed Frankenstein with Jean-Claude Van Damme and put him in Event Horizon. He systematically dismantles the bad guys one at a time in a gloriously brutal fashion. He finishes off with Sleeveless in Seattle by smashing his head off. In case you think I'm exaggerating about the blood, there was so much blood in this fight, it shorts out the ship's engines. And yes, you heard that correctly. With all the criminals downstairs dead, he goes after the cops, and their bullets are useless against him, which shouldn't be surprising given the fact he'd a mouthful of maggots 20 minutes ago. Back on land again, the man in charge of finding the ship makes a call to somebody, and I can't describe what happens in this scene because we're on YouTube. What I can say, after he gets nowhere on the call, he smashes a metal box with his fist, and his eyes do this thing. Back in the doctor's room, the nurse, his young cabin mate, gets her throat torn out through the window, so the doctor says to hell with my Hippocratic oath, she looks disgusting, and he leaves. And when he bumps into the cops, they force him to explain what the hell's going on. He tells the audience he's been paid to monitor genetic experiments. And with a movie like this, that's as detailed an explanation as I need. Back upstairs, Jean-Claude Van Frankenstein rips limbs from sockets and doles out free Joker smiles to the remaining criminals. And he stabs and stabs and stabs and even beats somebody to death with their own severed arm. And for an undead convict with his eyes stapled shut and maggot breath, he sure has a talent for adding insult to injury. What remains of the cast bandage themselves up for the final act battle. They come across some info to explain all this bloody madness, and we find out Jean-Claude Van Frankenstein's a genetic experiment with the instincts of a wolf and the strength of 5 men. He doesn't age or deteriorate, and that makes him the ideal soldier. And then we get a quick flashback to his construction in 1943. Although I appreciate this detailed backstory, at this point my mind is so drenched in blood, I'm happy to get back to the slaughtering, thank you very much. Our main monster takes out the remaining cast handily, with one notable exception who manages to bite his arm off during their scuffle, like with his teeth. Have you ever bitten into a turkey leg and hit bone? This is really impressive. Then a helicopter finally arrives with a SWAT team led by the big boss from earlier, only they're not good guys at all. So they shoot some people, and when they try and shoot this guy, he ends up being one of the super soldiers too, so he escapes. Then the big boss super soldier beats up Jean-Claude Van Frankenstein by breaking his remaining arm, cutting his Achilles tendons, and slicing his throat, leaving the final battle between the 2 remaining super soldiers. So they kick and they punch and stab and fight, and the good guy version of the super soldiers wins. And holy moly, was that ever a lot of blood.
And there you have it, folks, the plot to Project Wolf Hunting. Now, there are elements of this story that I've skimmed over to keep this review bite-sized, but I'm sure you get the idea. Let's take a look at the good bits.
If you've watched any Korean films, you know they know how to tell a good story. But this isn't that kind of movie, which isn't a bad thing if you're in the mood for some mindless violence. This movie's feral and vicious and brutal and dripping with blood, and if you're into these sorts of things, it's also a hell of a lot of fun. The movie looks good aesthetically, it's well shot, it's well edited, it doesn't feel like a student project. The acting was fine as well, and I watched both the Korean version and the dubbed version. Once the action kicks off around the 30-minute mark, it doesn't really stop. As I've mentioned, there's blood everywhere in every moment of every scene, and if it's digital, I certainly couldn't tell, and I'm obsessed with special effects. They wrote in just enough of a plot to explain what was happening, but you won't really care about the plot once the action kicks off. This movie's sole purpose is to deliver inventive, ultra-violent gore, and it does that just fine.
The shite bits.
At times, the quantity of blood utilized was unjustified, and I'm going to pretend that bothers me for the sake of this shite bit section. Don't tell me I'm not a balanced wannabe movie critic.
The verdict.
So, should you watch Project Wolf Hunting? Or should you deprive yourself of this symphony of crimson carnage and crazy killing?
Is this the bloodiest movie of 2023? How the hell would I know? It's February. But in this humble wannabe film critic's opinion, it is the bloodiest so far by 1,000 gallons. And it's also a perfect blend of atrocity and adrenaline. If that's your kind of thing, throw the movie on, throw your feet up, and enjoy the bloodbath. Until next time, folks. It's me, Johnny, from that thing you just watched. If you enjoyed it, go down there and smash me in the face to subscribe. And if you want to watch another thing, there's one right there. Do it!